Okay, welcome back everyone. So here we are. We have now reached kind of the almost halfway mark here of our semester. And we are now going to continue after the fall of the Roman Republic to talk about now the birth of the Roman Empire. So we're going to have a few lectures here on the Roman world, the Roman Empire, the rise and the fall of the Roman Empire, quite a few different things to discuss as we go through this great adventure. You know, the Roman Republic is really important. The Roman Empire is the one that has some of the more interesting characters and individuals to talk about and discuss. So it should be a lot of fun. Hopefully you'll learn a lot too as we go through this. So first of all, right, here's some keywords that we need to kind of get down and kind of pick up where we left off. So just as a quick reminder, obviously as a reminder again, pause, write down the keywords. We'll go through some of these on this image, and some of them we're going to go through on a map here. So I'll show you a map here in a moment. But just to kind of also refresh our memory before we go any further, we had talked about, if you remember the previous lecture, the fall of the Roman Republic, the first triumvirate, Pompey, Crassus, Caesar, and how that all ended eventually with Pompey and Caesar at a civil war. Caesar wins. Caesar takes the title of Rex. And then he says, I want to be Rex for life. And then on the Ides of March, 44 BC, they stab him and Caesar is assassinated, creating this power vacuum. Who fills that power vacuum? Well, the person who fills that power vacuum is not one person, but instead three new people. And so this is where we get what we call the second triumvirate. And this is the material that you need to know for quiz number 2, right? So to be clear on this, your next quiz only will cover material starting from this lecture, right? And everything up to the week of the quiz. So I hope that's clear. The stuff from before the midterm is not going to be on quiz 2. So quiz 2 will only cover this material. Quiz 3 will then just only cover the material from, again, after quiz 2 to quiz 3. And then the final will cover everything from the second half of the semester, with the exception of that one essay that you have on the contributions of other civilizations to our world today. That essay could be from anywhere in the semester, right? If you remember when you looked at your review sheet for the midterm, one of the possible essay questions said this is not for the midterm, it's a possible one for the final. And then you'll get a new review sheet for the final with the essays and the IDs on it as well. I'll post that pretty soon. And you'll want to look at that and start working on that too. So you'll have that a long time to work on it. All right, so I just wanted to mention that before we get into the material. So I hope all that's clear. If anybody's have any questions, please let me know. So anyway, so we get to the second triumvirate, and the second triumvirate, 43 BC, and includes 3 men, Mark Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus, okay? And then who is Octavia? Well, I'll explain her in a second. And then Sicily, Cleopatra, Civil War, Battle of Actium. I'm going to kind of run through all of that as we go through this. So again, get all these terms down, and then we're going to go ahead and kind of tell this story while we're on a map here and can really explain it well. So here on this map, we're going to kind of tell the story of what happens with the second triumvirate and how this officially leads to the beginning of the Roman Empire. So right now, technically, it's still the Roman Republic. So they create the second triumvirate. They tie it together with a marriage ceremony. This time, Octavia, who is the sister of Octavian, don't shoot me, these are how they make up their names, is going to marry Mark Antony. So they kind of bonded together that way. So that's one. Now, the other thing that they do is they each get kind of a piece of real estate that's kind of going to be their own. Sicily will kind of fall into the domain of Octavian. Why does that matter? Well, because after a few years of creating the second triumvirate, Lepidus tries to take Sicily over. He tries, he fails. They oust him out of the triumvirate. He's not killed, but he's ousted out of the triumvirate. He was honestly the minor of the 3 figures anyways. Again, we weren't sure who was going to, both Mark Antony and Octavian were very powerful men. Both had close ties with Caesar. Octavian was, again, the grandnephew of Caesar. Some people thought he was going to be the heir. Some people Mark Antony thought was going to be the heir. At the end of the day, those were the 2 key figures. So what happens now is there's really just two of them. And then Mark Antony does something. Mark Antony takes a little trip to Egypt. Now, at the time, Egypt is not part of Rome. Remember that. Egypt at the time is controlled by Cleopatra. So Mark Antony gets to Egypt, and there Cleopatra seduces him. She first gets Caesar, and now she gets Mark Antony. Why is that a problem? Well, I just got through saying Mark Antony's married to Octavia. At first, it's not that huge of a deal. Later, it's going to become a big deal, right? And where it becomes a big deal is when we get to the year 33 BC, because in 33 BC, the tension between Mark Antony and Octavian explodes. It explodes into a massive civil war. So now we have another civil war in what is technically still the fall of the Roman Republic. And then I need to explain this to show you how the Roman Empire starts. So the Civil War goes on, and when the Civil War begins, because Mark Antony's got this connection with Cleopatra, he gets support of the Egyptian army. And you go, boy, that's a big advantage for Mark Antony. Not so much. And the reason I say that is Octavian is really smart. What Octavian does is he paints Cleopatra as this foreigner enemy of Rome, that she is a sorceress casting spells against Mark Antony, that it has forced Mark Antony to betray the pure Octavia. Remember, Octavia is the Roman. And so for all the support Mark Antony gets from the Egyptian army, he's losing the loyalty of the Romans. And when you're fighting a civil war, obviously you want more loyalty from people from within your own nation. And so with that, the tide of the war really towards Octavian. There is a battle called the Battle of Actium. You can see it here on the map there, right there between Greece and Italy. And at that Battle of Actium in 31 BC, Mark Antony and Cleopatra are defeated. When Mark Antony and Cleopatra are defeated, they basically see all is lost. They commit suicide. Mark Antony stabs himself. Cleopatra, well, you know, in all the movies and stuff, if you've ever seen movies on this, they have the snake and they bite her and it's really dramatic. She probably just drank the poison of the snake. Regardless, they're both dead. At which point, Octavian is now the last man standing again. And Cleopatra's gone, so Octavian takes advantage of that and takes control of Egypt. So now Egypt will be part of Rome. If you see on this map, if you remember the maps earlier on the Roman Republic, it seems like Rome controls more, and they will, because as we talk about the Roman Empire, the final end of the Republic and the Empire, we're going to see the Roman Empire expanding even more than they already did during the Republic, where they, of course, expanded quite dramatically. So anyways, now Egypt is part of Rome. And Octavian is feeling, I can do what I want to do. So what does Octavian now do? He goes back to Italy. And we get to a very important year, 27 BC. It was on this year when Octavian is now back in Italy. And he decides, Octavian, that he wants a new name and a couple new titles. What names, what titles? Well, this man that I've been referring to as Octavian, maybe a lot of you haven't heard that, but maybe you've heard of his other name, because his other name is the name of the first Roman emperor, and his name is Augustus. So there he is, Augustus, 27 BC, the birth of the Roman Empire. So this is the official beginning. Why? Because when, there's an image of him, right? Good image of him there. Augustus, the term Augustus means revered one. He takes the title Princeps Civitatis. So there's three new names. Augustus, right? That's what he's called now. Princeps Civitatis, which is first citizen, and Imperator, which is, of course, emperor. So Augustus is your first Roman emperor, and he will be Roman emperor from 27 BC to 14 AD. One of the things you'll notice is the dates are going to start going up now. We are going from BC to AD, which of course also means something else is happening, the birth of Christianity. We're not skipping over it now, but trust me, we're going to spend a lot of time on that later on in subsequent lectures. Christianity is going to play a huge role in Western civilization, so obviously we're going to spend some time on that. But for now, we're still focused on the birth of the empire. So here you have Augustus. He is your first Roman emperor, 27 BC, and he now is emperor of the entire Roman world. So what is he going to do? What's going to happen with Augustus? So let's talk about him a bit. So here are some keywords for Augustus. get all these down, and then we'll start talking about his reign and the first dynasty that is part of the Julio of the Roman Empire. So one of the things I like to kind of think about here, there's a document, and ideally what you should do is pause this video and look at this document called Res Justia. It's in your files, it's in your modules, so you should kind of pause this and read the document. When you read the document, ask yourself a simple question, right? After reading that document, do you think Augustus is a good leader of Rome? Okay, so I'm kind of trusting you here. Pause, go get that document. It's on your modules there, right? It's called the kind of the achievements of Augustus. It's called Res Justia is the official name, and read it. And what I want you to do is after you read it, come back and play. And then I want you to think about what I just asked you, right? Is Augustus a good leader of Rome? So pausing. Hopefully now you've read it, and you can continue on. So what do you think, right? Is he a good leader of Rome? And, on the surface, a lot of people reading go, oh, yeah, he's great. He did all these great things in Rome and so forth. And then I tell students to point out one of the articles in the Res Justia. And it's the one that says, the dictatorship offered to me in my presence and my absence, I refuse to accept. And when you read that one, I hope if you're reading it critically, you're thinking, wait a second, I just heard in this video that he's the first emperor. What are you talking about? He is the first emperor. The dictatorship offered him, he happily accepted, not refused to accept. So the problem with that document that hopefully you all just read, the Res Justia, it is propaganda. Some of it's true. Yes, he did add Egypt. Yes, he gave a lot of things to a lot of people. But the reality is this was done by Augustus, commissioned by Augustus to make himself look like this great guy. In reality, he is an emperor who controls pretty much everything in Rome. Now, you have to ask yourself this question. Caesar tried this. Caesar was assassinated. Why is Augustus able to do this? Why is Augustus able to become emperor? Not only become emperor, establish an entire dynasty called the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Why is he able to do this? And the reason he's able to do this is these two terms here. There's one term, two words, Pax Romana. What Augustus is able to do is bring Pax Romana to Rome. What does that mean? Roman peace. A roughly 200-year period, starting from the time of Augustus, when Rome will be in Roman peace. In other words, very few or minimal civil wars. Rome is expanding. Rome is doing well. Now, I want to be clear, it's not a Roman peace for everyone. If you're a Christian or you're Jewish, this is not a good time to be living in the Roman Empire. But for the Roman people who are, practicing the Roman pagan religion and all that, this is a very stable time. And the reason Augustus is able to become emperor and hold on to it is frankly because what has been going on for the 100 years before. Civil war, chaos, pirates, slave uprisings, and Augustus is able to restore order and stability. Guys, this is not a unique story. If you think of the 20th century, think of the Hitlers and the Maos and the Stalins and the Mussolinis, one of the things they have in common is how quickly people are willing to accept a strong, iron-fisted rulership for political stability. It's not a unique story. How quickly people are willing to accept a loss of freedom if someone is going to take care of them. Another good term that's good to note, I didn't put it here on the keywords, but just note it down as you're listening, bread and circus, right? I don't know if you've ever heard that expression before. Bread and circus, it's a Roman term. What does that mean? You give people food, you give people entertainment, bread and circus, and you can pretty much do what you want to do to them. And that's essentially the human nature element of this that's so important, that it takes an effort by individuals to think to themselves, wait a second, I don't want the easy road, right? I rather, what's the expression goes, I rather live standing up, die standing up than live on my knees. That's the expression. I rather die standing up than living on my knees. But that's not that easy for a lot of people. A lot of people prefer to live on their knees than die standing up. That the idea of, being a free people is something that is, really got to fight for sometimes. And a lot of times people just say, hey, I have stability. All right, somebody's taking care of me. And it's a very important lesson because it's a lesson that can apply to any republic, even ours, that if things get bad, well, people accept whatever they accept, to have order and stability. And it's just something important to think about. It's why we study history, actually. So he institutes the Pax Romana, and people follow him, and he's able to do this. Augustus does a couple other things as well. He issues the hereditary principle. What is that? Well, there's still a Roman Senate. Even when you have an empire, you still have a Senate. The difference is now in the empire, the Roman Senate is just kind of, you know, very weak compared to the Republic, if any power at all, depending on who the emperor is. And that's true again if you think of the modern totalitarian rulers. There might be a Politburo, there might be a Reichstag, but they don't have any official power, right? And so, same thing here. The hereditary principle basically says you can become a senator if you inherited it and you're loyal to Augustus and his family line. And so that's something that really encompasses the weakness of the Senate. The Praetorian Guards, I don't know if you've ever heard of them before, but another key thing Augustus does, these are the elite guards. They are about the only people during the Roman Empire that have powers to deal with the emperors. That is the one group you do not want to tick off is the Praetorian Guard if you're an emperor, because they're the ones who protect you, and you tick them off and you're going to have some problems. We'll see that in another couple stories here. And then the other term you have here is this Julio-Claudian dynasty. So he creates a dynasty, Augustus, which means not only is he emperor, he basically hand selects the next emperor. Julia is his daughter. Don't mix this up with the other Julia we talked about before. Tiberius is the guy who wanted to be emperor. So he tells Julia, you're going to divorce your current husband. You're married Tiberius because I want Tiberius to be the next emperor. And Augustus controlled a lot of other things. Apparently, he controlled, marriages. He controlled where you could sit in the gladiator games. He was a very controlling individual, as one would be, who is emperor. But again, Pax Romana, so people were okay with it. So that's essentially the story of Augustus and the story of the rise of the Roman Empire. So now what I want to do, and the big chunk of our next, quiz is going to be a lot of Roman emperors. One other thing I'm going to give you is a list of Roman emperors and kind of a chart, and you're going to want to follow that. So after each lecture I give you, whip out that chart and fill it out, right? It's going to help you prepare for quiz number 2. It's going to be not everything on quiz number 2, but a good chunk of it is all these Roman emperors. So obviously Augustus, we spent a lot of time on him. You want to know him well. But there are others as well. So let's go through the rest of the Julio-Claudians now, and this is going to be pretty fun. All right, so this is the Julio-Claudian dynasty. You had obviously Augustus, he's the first one. Then you have Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and there's going to be one more, which we'll get to not in this lecture, but in the next one. So what's going on here? Let's go through all of them. So first of all, get them all down, and again, I'll probably put up a map to explain their stories. So first get all this information, and then we'll talk about it. All right, so again, just pause if you need to write it down. And again, here, you don't need to memorize these dates, guys. Again, I put the dates down as long as you remember circa 20 AD, circa 40 AD, circa 50 AD. Even if you remember all of them as circa first part of the ADs, you're fine, right? All right, so Tiberius, right, for him, his reign, you don't really need to know much about it all. Just kind of know he was the next emperor. He doesn't do that much, actually. It turns out he doesn't even really like being emperor very much. He ends up living a lot of his life on this island called Capri. You don't even need to remember the name of the island. I didn't put it up as a key term. But he just kind of, lived an okay life and so forth until he finally died in 37 AD. He was replaced by his grandson Caligula. And when Caligula takes over, this is where things start to get a little bit more interesting, right? So I want to kind of talk about Caligula and talk about some of the things that are going to happen here during his reign, because as it says there, 1,000 days of terror. So the story of Caligula, if you haven't heard of it before, I'm just kind of looking down a couple of my notes here because I want to make sure I don't miss any of his crazy. It is pretty insane. So the first year of Caligula's reign, 37 to about 38 AD, everything seemed to go fairly smoothly, right? Then he gets sick, and he gets this illness. He recovers physically. Mentally, not so much, because Caligula will begin to do some of the most insane things any leader of any nation has ever done. I mean, try to imagine some of the things I'm describing being done by U.S. presidents, for example. You can't even wrap your brains around it. So let me just go to our map here, and I'll start talking a little bit about what Caligula does, and we'll talk about Claudius. So again, make sure you have all these names here. Okay. All right, so here's just another little view of our map. And what are some things Caligula is going to do? Well, one of the things Caligula does is he is ruler of Egypt, remember. And since he is ruler of Egypt, he believed himself to be a pharaoh and believed himself to be a god. And he wanted to be treated like a god. The Roman senators, anytime a Roman senator walked by, they were forced to kiss his feet, to bend down and kiss his feet. So again, imagine, American senators bowing down and kissing the feet of a president of the United States. I don't think that'd go over too well. But this is what the Roman senators are required to do. Also, because he ruled over Egypt, he thought it was perfectly okay to have an ancestral affair with his own sister. So again, something that the Romans frowned upon a bit, and that was something he did as well. Another, and again, these are all several examples. So all of these are little things you could jot down. I don't remember off the top of my head how many there are, but there are gonna be like 6, 7 examples. So those are already a couple. And these are just kind of the crazy things he does. He's had a lot of money. He's Roman emperor. What does he use the money on? Not, helping Rome, but instead on perfumes and baths and banquets and parties and all of that. Another thing about Caligula is that he had a really, really sick sense of humor. I'm going to give you a few things he did that people thought he thought were funny, that he thought was funny. But for us, it'd be like torturous. So he would, like, for example, during the gladiator games, remove the canopies during the hottest time of the day because he just wanted to see people in the heat swelter. He thought that was funny. Or even worse, he would take like an old man, somebody he thought was an old feeble man. He would put him in the gladiator games against a wild animal, the wildest animal he could find, because he thought it would be funny to watch an old man be torn apart by a lion or something. He would force parents to watch the execution of their own children. And again, he's not doing these things to punish people, remember. He's doing these things because he thinks it's funny. So he is really demented in many ways. And so he did things like that. Oh, another thing he did is he named his horse as a senator. So there you go. He named his horse as senator. That must have been an interesting situation. What else? Oh, and here's another good one. He decides, I want to invade Britain. At the time, Britain is not part of the Roman Empire yet. So he says, I'm going to invade Britain. I want to conquer. So he organizes men. The Roman legion is here. They're near the North Sea there. They're ready to invade Britain. And then the story goes that just as about ready to invade Britain, he gives the orders to his men to start collecting seashells. And so here you have the Roman legions collecting seashells. I mean, each of these things is just mad. And this is why we call his reign kind of the 1,000 years of terror, 1,000 years, 1,000 days of terror, 1,000 days of madness. And it's 1,000 days because you see, he doesn't rule very long. Why is he only, and you go, I thought this was Pax Romana. Well, yeah. And eventually what happens in this 41 AD period is he's killed. And he's killed by the Praetorian Guards because he ticks them off. And that's the one group you don't tick off. But it's not a civil war. And why isn't it a civil war? Because nobody liked the guy. I mean, nobody liked him. And so it was really easy to kind of transition to the next guy, Claudius. So anyways, that's a few things about Caligula there, kind of a little list of crazy. So again, obviously, as you get your review sheet for the final, if you have names like Caligula or any of these emperors, it's not enough just say he's crazy. You want to give examples, right? So there you go. All right, next, Caligula is dead, and he's going to be replaced by his uncle Claudius, so same family line, so we're still part of the Julio-Claudian family. What's the deal with Claudius? Well, Claudius kind of has a mixed reign, some good and some bad. So let's start with the good. One of the things about Claudius, there's two really good things he does, right? So obviously one, two, is he's very good at spending the money on Rome for Rome. He builds infrastructure, builds cities. I put an optional video for you guys to watch on Roman engineering. A lot of the aqueducts that Rome builds are because of Claudius. He builds a lot of the aqueducts in Rome. So that's one of his big achievements, and just all the infrastructure. So that's really good. That's one. The second thing is he does something no one has been able to do since the birth of Rome. He actually does conquer Britain. So now Britain will be part of the Roman Empire. So he does that, pretty impressive. It's always harder to conquer Britain because it's an island, but Claudius does that. In fact, he's so proud of that. One of the terms I gave you there was Britannicus. Claudius has a son, and after he conquers Britain, he does this pretty early in his reign, around the year 43 AD. He names his son Britannicus because he was so happy he conquered Britain. So those are the two really good things he does. So again, if you have a quiz question, I might ask you which Roman emperor conquered Britain, and the answer would be Claudius. So again, as you're thinking about quiz 2 already, those are some things to think about. Okay, so you have that. Next, oh, and by the way, just as another reminder, it's on your syllabus, but as a reminder, I'll just tell it to you now since I'm thinking quiz 2 before I go on with Claudius. You should start reading Tacitus, right? You're going to start reading Tacitus, the Germania. There's going to be a discussion. There may be, she'll need it, credit for discussion, and there still might be some points on the quiz on it as well. So I haven't, made the quiz yet and stuff, but just be prepared for that too. So definitely read the Germania. When you read the Germania, I think I mentioned this before, but I'm just reminding you again, you're not reading both books. There's only the Germania. You don't need to read the Agricola. And you're not focused on every name of every tribe. You're focused on the characteristics of the Germanic people that we'll talk about in a little while. All right, so back to Claudius. He's done really well. He's conquered Britain, and he's built the infrastructure. That's the positive. What's the negative? Well, the negative is his personal life. Claudius was born with a little bit of a birth defect. He spoke with a stutter. He wasn't very charismatic, and he had problems with the women. He'll get married 4 times. First 2 wives basically both marry him because he's got money, he's emperor, and then I guess Claudius gets disillusioned with them and divorces both of them. The third, I didn't even give you their names. The third wife was a woman named Messalina. And when I say woman, she was pretty young. She was, I think, like 14 years old when he married her, which, of course, today seems very, very young. Back then, it was more accepted, but still very young, even by that standards a bit. I think Claudius was in his 50s at the time. And the reason he married Messalina, he thought, oh, she really loves me. Well, no, she didn't love him. Messalina basically married Claudius, not for money, but for power. She wanted to marry Claudius to get her family into power of Rome. Claudius discovered this and, of course, was very upset, and he killed her and much of her family. So Messalina didn't get over too well. And at that point, Claudius is like, I'm done with the women, no more. But then you saw that other name there, Agrippina. So what happens next? Well, this is what's going to happen next. Claudius is going to rule until 54 AD. He marries Agrippina. And when Claudius dies in 54 AD, his 4th wife, Agrippina, outlives him. Now, what happens when an emperor dies? When an emperor dies in an empire system, the person who takes over next is the son. If you don't have a son, it can go to a grandson, another relative, an uncle, whatever. But ideally, it goes father to son. That's how an empire works. Now, does Claudius have a son? And the answer is yes, Britannicus. So, how many of you have ever heard of the Roman Emperor Britannicus? And I'm guessing a lot of you are going, I've never heard of Roman Emperor Britannicus. Well, probably not, because there never was one. Britannicus was alive and well when Daddy died. So the question is, why didn't Britannicus become the next emperor? And the reason Britannicus didn't become the next emperor is because of his 4th wife, Claudius's 4th wife, Agrippina. Because you see, Agrippina, before she married Claudius, was married once before. And in a previous marriage, Agrippina had her own son, a man named Nero, who you may have heard of before. And so somehow Agrippina will manipulate the entire dynastic system to make her son Nero the next emperor and the final person in the Julio-Claudian line. So I didn't put his name up, but now, I wanted to save it for this moment, but you will have the Emperor Nero who is going to come into power after Claudius, not Britannicus. How does Agrippina pull that off? Well, I'm not going to actually lecture on this. Instead, what I have for you is a documentary, a YouTube documentary. You're going to watch it. You have a discussion board you need to do on it as well to make sure you watch it. It's 1 point, it's 1% of your grade, but every point counts, of course. You know, I always say don't think of it in terms of points, think of it as percentages, and you don't want to throw away 1% of your grade by just watching a documentary and just summarizing what happens. And as you watch this documentary, there are basically three things I want you to know. What did Agrippina do to get Nero into power, right? How did she manipulate the system to get Nero into power instead of Britannicus? Because Nero is still young. Number two, what does Nero do when he is in power? And that's going to be the bulk of what you're going to focus on in that documentary. And number three is going to be what happened to Nero, just how his reign ends. That's going to be pretty brief. And know that he is the last of the Julio-Claudian line. So you're going to watch that. That's the next thing you're going to do. So you're listening to this, my lecture. Then you're going to watch a documentary. And after the Nero documentary, then you can pick back up with my lectures again after Nero. All right, so I hope all that's clear. Again, let me know if you have any questions. Make sure you're already thinking about studying for quiz 2. Don't fall behind. And that's it. All right, you guys have a good one. Again, you have that optional video if you want to watch on the Roman engineering. The Nero one you need to watch. All right, that's it. Bye, guys.